away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
Oh, who doesn't miss those days? Hello, America. How's that little project coming along now? The fundamental transformation that we've talked about now for almost 20 years, it seems. We have had 12 official years of the Obama-Biden fundamental transformation, and I don't know if you can see the progress that they've made. That's why they cannot let the White House go, because it's not just the fundamental transformation of America, it is also the fundamental transformation of the entire Western world. That's why Donald Trump cannot be allowed to be president, because the whole world is in the middle of transformation. Now, they can let Joe go. Joe had to go. I mean, he served his purposes as an obedient regime puppet. But then he just had to go because, he wasn't going to win. But you can't stop the momentum since they've been building it since 2008. And if it wasn't for that darn Donald Trump, they had a 4-year rest. That almost wrecked everything. Well, their progressive socialist project is a persistent long-term project that is well over a century old now. It has taken that long because we do have some built-in hurdles here in America. Namely, you, the American people, who have tended to prefer, actual freedom. Then there's the Constitution and that darn Supreme Court that sometimes gets in the way. Darn it. And then there's Congress. They still have to play ball with Congress sometimes, although the Progressive Socialist Project has expanded the executive branch so much that it has largely castrated Congress. We have no checks and balances. But this project's focus has always been on the White House, because in our system, with its clunky checks and balances, well, that's the leftist fast track and the fastest track to fundamental transformation of America. And they don't have to ask you for permission. They'll just have some bureaucrat do all of it. They cannot help themselves. Progressive socialists love authoritarianism. They fear Donald Trump, and they fear monger about Donald Trump and say he's going to be a dictator. Really? Let me tell you, they crave their own dictatorship, and they are building it right now. They tell you that they're all about public service and freedom and democracy, but it is not. It is all about power, and it is time America faces these facts. Look at the dictator record of the Democratic governors during the pandemic in 2020. Their taste for power and dictatorship is why most Democrats didn't bat an eye at the hijacking of Joe Biden's re-election campaign by Kamala Harris. The same Kamala Harris who did so poorly in 2020 in the presidential race that she had to drop out 2 months before the Iowa caucuses without ever earning a single pledged delegate. No one in the Democratic Party wanted to vote for her. But in their current pecking order, it's her turn. She has the proper left-wing extremist record. She's also friends and very friendly with the Obamas, who play a much bigger role than anyone even imagines, I'm guessing. That's what she was selected for. I mean, she's a compliant team player with a progressive socialist globalist cabal. She was selected because they knew he would not last 8 years. He might make it through the election of 2024, they thought, but he's going to either be taken out because of corruption, or he's just going to be a senile old bag. So he's going to go out. Who do we have that could be compliant and a puppet? The cabal is apparently still haggling over Kamala's marching orders, because even though she took over Joe's campaign 3.5 weeks ago, her official website still has no platform or policy positions. Although they did take the time, if you click over to merch, to make sure that her priorities were fulfilled by selling this amazing trans flag t-shirt. Yeah, that's great. It's made up of Kamala's wearing pantsuits that are the colors of the trans flag. You can also get this stunning design on a mug. I don't know which one. I really want more. The Democratic showrunners know they've got time to figure out how to spin Kamala's extremism, because the mainstream media is doing all of the smoke and mirrors for them. The White House officials recently told Politico that Harris's reputation as a far left-wing crusader is an unfair holdover from positions she took when she ran way back in 2019 when she ran for president. They say those positions don't really represent who she is. Really? Then why did she run on them? What changed her mind? One senior White House official said, quote, "That 2020 primary was a distorting experience for a lot of people," end quote. Wow. And the distortion continues. Apparently, Politico just accepted that and moved on. Instead of asking the obvious question, did she believe it then and was lying to us now, or was she lying then? What happened? What happened? During those debates in 2020 in the primaries, Harris was clearly in favor of decriminalizing border crossings and even providing illegals with taxpayer-funded health care. That's about as left as you can go. She also sponsored the No Ban Act, which would have limited the president's ability to keep specific immigrants from entering the U.S. So Harris had a very left-wing position on immigration, essentially in favor of open borders and people coming in from Iran. And then she became vice president. And then Biden dumped the job on her that nobody wanted, trying to figure out what to do about the border. Well, she royally flunked that assignment, and that's not my assessment, although I agree with it. It was the official assessment from Numbers USA, a Washington, D.C. based organization that monitors border security policies and grades members of Congress on their immigration voting. They gave Senator Harris an F-. I didn't even know you could get an F-. Here's Kamala trying to squirm out of a very easy question from NBC's Lester Holt in 2021.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
Yeah, it's a really complex point. It has now been 2.5 years since Harris's last visit to the border. During the Biden-Harris administration, 7.3 million illegal immigrants have been allowed into the U.S. Meanwhile, according to the recent House Judiciary Committee report, quote, under the Biden-Harris administration, of the more than 250 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list who were encountered by Border Patrol at the southwest border between fiscal years 21 and 23, DHS released into American communities at least 99 of those on a terrorist watch list, with at least 34 others still in DHS custody, but not yet removed from the United States. The report found that the Border Patrol has encountered migrants on the terrorist watch list from 36 different countries that hate our guts, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. But as soon as Harris took over Joe's campaign, the media went into damage control. Oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like it. Now on the border issue, even to the point of trying to convince us she was never really Biden's border czar. I never called her that. I never gave her that title. They did. It is such a stupid gaslighting because it's really easy to disprove, yet the media is counting on the American people to be stupid. The Media Research Center put together an example of the media calling Harris the border czar back in 2021 and then lying about it with a straight face today.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People gonna have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
How? Doesn't it make your head hurt trying to keep up with these people? Of course, running interference for Kamala Harris is not new. The media did the same thing in 2020 when Joe Biden announced Harris as his running mate. Remember, she's as left as we got, okay? She's the furthest left. What did they do? Watch.
Kamala Harris comes from the middle-of-the-road moderate wing of the Democratic Party, not the first choice of progressives.
Okay, if you think that's bad, the LA Times actually wrote a story and called her a centrist. And then the New York Times called her a pragmatic moderate. But I think the award has to go to the Washington Post. They took the cake with, quote, Harris is a small c conservative. I mean, they're not trying to be funny with this stuff, yet it's hysterical. And yet, about 50% of the people in America don't care or don't know. According to government GovTrack, Harris' Senate record was left of the devout socialist Bernie Sanders. GovTrack also found that Harris joined bipartisan bills the least often compared with all other Senate Democrats. Harris and the media may not want you to know what her positions and agenda truly are, but we can find them by going through the historic record. So here's a quick rundown of Kamala's greatest hits. She was the first senator to co-sponsor Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, which would have eliminated all private insurance. In the aftermath of the 2020 George Floyd riots, she used every possible euphemism for defunding the police without ever using the word defund. But everybody knew exactly what she meant.
I think that a big part of this conversation really is about reimagining how we do public safety in America, which I support. In many cities in America, over 1/3 of their city budget goes to police. So we have to have this conversation. What are we doing?
Yeah. And we had that conversation, and then you just went ahead and reimagined the police, and look how great things are. Harris went on to co-sponsor the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020, which would have limited legal protections for our boys in the blue. In 2004, when Harris was district attorney of San Francisco, she refused to pursue the death penalty against a man who murdered a San Francisco police officer. At the officer's funeral, then Senator Dianne Feinstein gave a eulogy during which she criticized Harris, who was in attendance, and hundreds of police officers gave her a standing ovation in agreement with Feinstein. You have to be an extremist when Dianne Feinstein, of all people, pimp slaps you for being too far left on an issue. But Harris was also a proud original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal in the Senate, the most authoritarian legislation in all of U.S. history. She co-sponsored a bill to ban oil exploration across 1.5 million acres of federal land. She also made, quote unquote, environmental justice a central part of her climate plans for America. She also sponsored legislation to set up a committee exploring reparation payments for Black Americans. She is also strongly against voter ID requirements. She wants to pack the Supreme Court and eliminate the Senate filibuster. She bragged about gaining access to gender reassignment surgeries for California prison inmates when she was that state's attorney general. She champions the Equality Act, which would allow men to compete in women's sports. And she is, I'm going to be kind, borderline obsessed with abortion. She has attacked crisis pregnancy centers as vice president, calling the free help they offer women, quote, predatory practices. Do you think as president they're going to remain open? As a senator, she voted twice against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which means you can still kill the baby. You don't give them any kind of care. You just put them in a closet and let them die. In March, she became the very first vice president to visit and celebrate a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic as part of her Fight for Reproductive Freedoms tour. The fact that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz showed up to her tour stops there reportedly impressed Harris, and later helped seal the deal for picking him as her running mate. There is nothing like abortion to bring weird people together. Killing the unborn baby really brings out the Kamala dictator side as well. According to a report by the Daily Signal, when Harris was California's Attorney General, she had the home of pro-life journalist David Daleiden raided by California DOJ agents who seized video evidence that potentially incriminated employees of Planned Parenthood. Why? Well, he recorded undercover conversations with those employees in which they allegedly discussed selling body parts of aborted babies. According to this Daily Signal report, the raid on his home happened just 2 weeks after Planned Parenthood officials had a meeting with then Attorney General Kamala Harris. His attorney, Steve Cooley, says, and I quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that Kamala Harris, as Attorney General, personally ordered the raid on my client's home. This was an effort to seize the videotapes that he had made during the course of his investigation. That was the primary purpose of that raid, to basically suppress his activities with respect to exposing the illegal sale of fetal body parts." He later added, and I quote, "I think Kamala Harris' presidency would be incredibly dangerous for civil rights." You think? Now we're going to take a quick break. You need to share all of this with your friends because they're not going to get any of this. And you can check and make sure it's all correct yourself. It's not hard to find. At least, what time is it? Right now. When we come back, I want to take you through some of the key influencers in Harris's life, including those who are currently running her campaign. Well, as a dog owner, how often do you think about the food you're giving that best friend of yours? Is it something he likes? More importantly, is it good for him? The unfortunate truth is that brown food is dead food. If you're feeding your dog kibble food, it really needs some green stuff with it. Owning a dog is a ton of responsibility. And my kids don't think so, because mom and dad take the responsibility, mainly mom. But taking care of their basic needs. My dog Uno now is getting older and slowing down, and I'm just heartbroken. But I'm pretty sure that when I added rough greens to his dog food, I think it gave him a happier, healthier, and longer life. It's not a dog food. It's a supplement that you sprinkle on the dog's food. It was created by naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black. It's full of vitamins, minerals, probiotics, antioxidants, you name it. If it's healthy for your dog, it's probably in rough greens. Most dogs love it, but they want to make sure that your dog loves it without, having you put anything out of your pocket. So they're going to send you a first trial bag for free. You just go to roughgreens.com/Beck or call 833-GLEN33. You just pay for shipping. They'll send this free bag to you. 833-GLEN33. roughgreens.com/Beck. I know they're working overtime on this, but Kamala Harris is no moderate. The spin specialist in her campaign and in the media are working overtime to convince America that she's moderate. She's relatable to Americans just because she's just like you. But she is not. I'm going to make a bold statement here, but I believe it to be 100% true. She is America's Hugo Chavez. If you elect Kamala Harris, a socialist, you will find out what kind of politician she really is. She is Chavez, and we will end up like Venezuela. Now, you look at people, if you want to know who they are, you look at what they do, how they vote, the legislation they jumped on board with. We gave you some of that. But you find out what the real priorities are by who they spend time with and the places they visit. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. Harris's record could not be clearer. She has never labeled herself as a socialist that we can find, but her record screams socialist. This is who she is. She has been immersed in America's far-left subculture since birth, and it's an identity she fully embraces. Harris's late mother, Shamala, died in 2009. She was an immigrant from India. Harris's father, Donald, is an immigrant from Jamaica. In the early 1960s, Harris's parents were both graduate students at UC Berkeley. They first met at a meeting of a student group called the Afro-American Association, which would go on to create the Kwanzaa holiday and the Black Panther Party. Harris's parents bonded over their mutual passion for civil rights and the radical political activism on campus. Now, you might remember the tale that Kamala spun in the media when she ran for president the first time about her parents taking her to a civil rights protest in a stroller.
They're marching away and, shouting and all of that. And then I think it was my Uncle Freddie, looked down and looked in the stroller, which was empty, and said, "Where's Kamala?" And apparently they left me like a block behind. I'd fallen out the stroller. I'm fussing and fussing. It's much cuter when she would tell the story, but she'd say, so then she would look down at me and, "Kamala, what do you want? What do you want?" And I looked back up at her and I said, "Freedom."
It turned out that even Snopes, the amazing fact-checking site, had to admit that Kamala's story shared some similarities with a story that Martin Luther King Jr. told in a 1965 interview, but never mind that. The point is that from the stroller age, Harris was influenced by Berkeley political culture. She would continue to have that around her during her entire adolescence. Her father became a Marxist economics professor, which I don't know how you are an economist and a Marxist, but eventually he landed at Stanford, where he spent most of his career. In a 1972 essay, he promoted using aspects of the Soviet Union's first 5-year plan as a model for designing economies. That was a disaster. He later would become an advisor to the Jamaican government on economic issues. When Kamala was 7 years old, her parents divorced. She has a younger sister, Maya, who lived with her mom and spent summers with their father. Her mother chose Kamala's name, which means lotus, which is also the name for a Hindu goddess. In 2004 interview, Kamala's mother said, quote, "A culture that worships goddesses produces strong women," end quote. Kamala spent her middle and high school years living in Montreal, Canada, where her mother was a cancer research professor at McGill University. She again was raised on college campuses in the Bay Area and in Montreal, surrounded by the radicalism of academia, the forces that now drive DEI, transitioning children, abortion, the whole subversive agenda of the left-wing fringe. She almost can't help her socialism. It's all she knows. Harris is close to her sister, Maya, who was a senior policy advisor for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and was the head of the Harris campaign for president in 2019. It didn't go well for Harris. According to a New York Times report after the Harris campaign imploded in 2019, they said, quote, "Many of her advisors are now pointing a finger directly at Ms. Harris. In interviews, several of them criticized her for going on the offensive against rivals, only to retreat, and not firmly choosing a side in the party's ideological feud. She also created an organization with a campaign chairwoman, Maya Harris, who goes unchallenged in part because she's Ms. Harris's sister." One campaign strategist said it was impossible to tell if Maya Harris was speaking for herself as an advisor or as her sister's representative. Harris's state operations director in 2019 submitted a scathing resignation letter that said, quote, "This is my third presidential campaign, and I have never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly. Gil Duran, a former aide, said about Harris at the time, quote, "You can't run the country if you can't run your campaign." Well, the good news is she's not running her campaign and she won't be running the country. According to a report from the government watchdog organization Open the Books, Harris's struggles with running a staff have continued as vice president. The report finds a 91.5% turnover rate on her staff, with only 4 people still on her office payroll out of the original 47 staffers who started when she became VP. 24 staffers have quit just in the last year. When Harris was Attorney General of California, the father of one of Harris's office interns wrote an op-ed saying, quote, Harris vocally throws around F-bombs and other profanity constantly in her berating of staff and others. The staff is in complete fear of her. As Attorney General, Harris instructed her entire staff to stand every morning as she entered the office and say, "Good morning, General." He wrote, "My son was also giving instructions to never address Harris nor look her in the eye, as that was a privilege only allowed senior staff members." In Kamala Harris's current campaign, her sister Maya has supposedly taken an advisor role rather than being in charge this time. But Maya's husband, Tony West, is now also a key campaign advisor. The New York Times described him as Harris's secret weapon and major force in her campaign. Tony West was the California campaign co-chair of Barack Obama's presidential campaign in 2008, helping raise over $65 million. In 2012, West was named acting associate attorney general in Obama's Department of Justice, which made him third in command. Then Attorney General Eric Holder originally brought West into the DOJ to work as one of the defense lawyers for the al-Qaeda prisoners at Guantanamo. Before that, Tony West had worked as the pro bono defense lawyer for John Walker Lynn, a.k.a. the American Taliban, and insisted throughout the process that Lynn was, quote, not a terrorist, end quote. Tony West recently returned the favor and hired Eric Holder to be in charge of the vetting of VP candidates for Harris. Among Holder's top 3 picks was the socialist governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. I'll show you why he is also a threat to America next. There may come a time in the future, maybe the near future, where you and your family need to have emergency food on hand. And when that happens, wouldn't you prefer to have really good food on hand and not just that cardboard crap you got from some other emergency food company? I would like to recommend the Mega 3-month Emergency Food Kit from My Patriot Supply. If you purchase it right now at mypatriotsupply.com, you'll get a $300 discount. It comes jam-packed with 33 varieties of filling and delicious foods like chicken-flavored rice, old-fashioned Italian spaghetti, cheesy broccoli soup. Sounds better than what you were expecting already. But it also comes with a whole lot more. And I can tell you from personal experience, the food is absolutely delicious. It's really good. Most importantly, the emergency food kit provides a whopping 2,500 calories per day to keep you well fed and ready for anything. You need to make sure that you and your family are well prepared with great food. Go to mypatriotsupply.com right now. Save $300 on your Mega 3-month emergency food kit. Ships fast and free. Go to mypatriotsupply.com. Save $300 on your kit today. mypatriotsupply.com.
To characterize him as left is so unreal. It's just not what the question. He's right down the middle. He's a heartland of America Democrat.
Wow. That's only true if you mean right down the middle means the place between European socialism and Soviet communism. That's the only way it's in the middle. Because by any American political standard, there is no question that Tim Walz is a socialist who has that progressive love for authoritarianism that I mentioned earlier. Even the Washington Post admits that Walz is, quote, the most liberal of the 6 finalists Ms. Harris considered to be her running mate. Now, the coronation that Tim Walz went through with the mainstream media last week was gag-inducing with its level of dishonesty. Overwhelmingly, he was introduced to the nation as this normal, everyday, gosh darn it, Midwestern dad who's so quaint. He used to be a teacher and a football coach, and here's a picture of him fishing. And, he just kind of stumbled into politics, some kind of Mr. Smith goes to Washington. This is the story that America got. It was highlighted everywhere that Walz got on the Democrats' radar by saying this on NBC a few weeks ago.
We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something.
Yeah. So this sudden rise of Tim Walz was not sudden. It has been planned for a very long time. He first used that line calling Trump and Republicans weird in an interview with Politico last year, and his team has been working to make him go viral within the party for the past year and a half. They pitched him to every show and podcast that would take him. Over a year ago, they branded the string of socialist laws that he passed in Minnesota as the Minnesota Miracle. Now, the political origin story that Walz likes to tell about himself is that in 2004, he tried to take a group of students to a campaign rally for President George W. Bush. But the students were supposedly turned away because one of them had a John Kerry sticker on his wallet. Walz later claimed the incident so enraged him that he went to work for the John Kerry campaign as a county coordinator in Minnesota. Now, some dispute this story, including a man who says he was working for the Minnesota GOP in 2004 and took photos of the people protesting at the Bush rally that Walz likes to talk about. He says this photo shows Tim Walz holding a homemade John Kerry sign along with some students. Regardless, Walz was already on a path to leave teaching and become a politician. 5 months after that Bush rally, he enrolled in a progressive training program by Wellstone Action, which now goes by the name Repower. Repower is a far-left program to train progressive organizers, activists, and politicians. Oh, good, we have one of those again. Tim Walz's trainer in 2005 was a woman named Peggy Flanagan. They became very good friends, and when he was elected Minnesota governor 13 years later, he made Peggy Flanagan his lieutenant governor. The year after completing the activist program, Walz was elected to his first of 6 consecutive terms as a U.S. congressman from his rural Minnesota district. Now, he ran as a moderate because even now it's a mostly Republican district. But as soon as he had the chance as governor, the mask came off. Here he is just a few weeks ago during a fundraising event called White Dudes for Harris.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Neighborliness, which is kind of a unique rebranding of socialism that some Cuban immigrants might take issue with. Tim Walz is an unapologetic socialist. And it is important to understand that in his state, socialism is woven into the fabric of the Democratic Party. The official name of the party in Minnesota is the Democratic Farm Labor Party. That was formed in 1944 by a merger of Democrats and far-left party that included socialist and communist factions called the Farm Labor Party. Now, Tim Walz is a product of old-school Minnesota socialism. But he's so folksy, such a dad, so normal and relatable, that until you take 2 seconds to examine his actual record, you believe that bullcrap. For starters, he is working hard to turn his state into a haven for illegal immigrants. Minnesota has the largest Somali population outside of Somalia. In 2017, a study found that 25% of ISIS recruits in the U.S. came from Minnesota. Now, despite the growing cost and risk associated with being a sanctuary state, Walz emphasized in 2019 that, quote, the inn is not full in Minnesota. Walz not only maintains an open border policy in Minnesota, but he is furnishing a welfare state for illegal immigrants. Last year, he signed a bill into law that gives illegal immigrants free state college tuition, plus free health care and driver's license. And to pay for it, he increased his state spending by 40% and raised taxes on gas, retail deliveries, cars, and much more. He also signed a bill giving free state college tuition to lower-income students. Last year, as part of his effort to expand the right to vote, he signed a law allowing 55,000 convicted felons to vote. Just last year. Walz rivals California with the insanity of his climate policy, in which so far has passed a law requiring 100% clean energy across Minnesota by 2040. Now, along with 40 other climate mandates, it's going to make Minnesota very successful. During the pandemic, this governor, who specializes in folksiness and hip dad vibes, forced heavy-handed mask mandates on his subjects. Even 5-year-olds were required to wear a mask all day. Anticipating massive death toll from COVID, he used over $5.5 million in state funds to buy a refrigerated warehouse to use as a morgue. It was never used. Worst of all, he established a hotline for Minnesotans to report on their neighbors for violating the state's very strict social distancing rules. Violators found a $1,000 fine and up to 90 days in jail. When criticized, Walz defended his policy as a way to educate people, saying, quote, "It's for their own good." If we see people that might not be as informed on this as we are, it's a real educational piece, is it? And yet last week, when Walz debuted on stage as Harris's running mate, this is what he said.
In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
Does that seem like a golden rule for any progressive? Mind your own damn business? That is a conservative principle. That's a libertarian principle. It is certainly not a progressive principle. But again, it's all about the show. I guess he had his memory wiped out about the whole Minnesota spy hotline thing. Now, speaking of 2020, Walz also allowed the George Floyd riots to burn down Minneapolis for 3 days before he could finally be bothered to deploy the National Guard. This is footage of local newscasters at the time who were dumbfounded by the lack of response from Walz.
I know you have a request into the governor, anything, and they are refusing to make any kind of statement right now. Listen, we know they're busy, but I can't think of anything more important right now than explaining to us why we are allowing this to happen again.
And once again, we are asking the governor, we're asking Mayor Fry, what is the plan here? You said there was a plan yesterday. You said there was a plan for today.
Aren't you tired of asking that question? What is the plan here? Why? This doesn't make any sense. Aren't you tired of that? You are going to get so much more if they are elected president and vice president. What's their plan? Well, to finish the fundamental transformation of America, where nothing will make sense and America will become Venezuela. This is your last wake-up call, America. Now, those riots, $500 million in damage. And in the end, Walz basically excused the rioters.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at. This is a moment of inflection. It's a moment of real change. It's a moment that those folks who are out there demanding this are not going to take a commission or a report. They're going to want fundamental change. And that is what I think, that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this.
So fundamental change, you mean fundamental transformation. And it sure has worked. You know, that reminds me of a statement that the vice president made at the same time, where she was talking to a reporter and she said these riots are going to go on, and they should go on because they have a lot to say and people need to listen, and we need fundamental change. So while he was doing that, Kamala Harris helped raise money for the Minnesota Freedom Fund, an organization that bailed out the rioters. And among those bailed out were violent criminals who went on to commit more crimes, including murder. Walz let his own cities burn, and Harris helped bail out the perpetrators. It is their socialist ideal of selective justice at work. There's another shared passion that they have. It's their love for abortion. Did you see in the news today that Canada, which just started just for the absolute on death's door, started a MAID program, which is you can have doctor-assisted suicide if you're at the end of your life and you just need it. It is now the fifth leading cause of death in Canada. This is a death cult. It is evil, and I don't know why more people can't see it. Walz is a member of the Reproductive Freedom Alliance. This is a group started by California Governor Gavin Newsom to rally like-minded governors across the U.S. to expand abortion access. When I say California and freedom, do those go hand in hand? Now, Walz didn't need any encouragement on this. Last year, he signed an abortion law that guarantees Minnesota women the right to have their unborn child killed at any stage through birth. Part of that law repealed a ban on coercing women into having abortions. Wait. Coercing women into having abortions? That's not wrong? They also remove the requirements that women be informed about the medical risks of abortion. What person that actually cares about human beings says that doctors don't have to inform them of the risk that they're taking? The law also mandates that health insurance plan covers abortion. They love it. It removed the mandate that infants who survive an abortion be given life-saving care. This is a death cult. Walz is proudly signing in a law making Minnesota also a trans refuge. By the way, you know who the #1 leader is now in hormones for children? Planned Parenthood. He made it a refuge for children who want transgender surgery or irreversible hormone treatments. Under the law, a parent in another state cannot take custody action against a parent in Minnesota who is transitioning a child. And if parents in Minnesota refuse to grant their child these experimental trans treatments, this law allows state courts to take custody of the child. He also signed a separate bill mandating that all health insurance plan covers these gender transition procedures. Now, does Tim Walz sound like the typical folksy, everyday Midwestern dad? He sure doesn't to me. But maybe I don't understand America anymore. And if you think you're lost now, if we don't get everybody onto the bus, and I mean the actual bus, and make sure that they are voting, these people are going to win, and we will lose our country forever. Back in a minute with what Kamala Harris, the White House, if she's in it, entails. It is so important that we stick together. As Ben Franklin said, we all better hang together or we will certainly hang separately. For 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Why haven't you switched yet? You have a cell phone. You're going to get exactly the same cell service that you have now. You're going to save money. Plus, you're doing business with good people. What are you waiting for? You don't have to put up with all that leftist garbage. You're sending money to Verizon or whoever, and they're supporting Planned Parenthood. Patriot Mobile doesn't do that. In fact, they stand up for the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, even the Third Amendment. I think they're all high on. All of the amendments, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, America. They fight for it every day. But they give you great service at a great price, and they will keep your switching over really simple. You just call Patriot Mobile at 972-PATRIOT. Do it today. PatriotMobile.com/Beck. PatriotMobile.com/Beck. You'll get a free month when you use the offer code Beck. So don't get fooled by other providers pretending to share your values or having the same coverage they don't and can't. Join me. PatriotMobile.com/Beck. 972-PATRIOT. Do you realize that this election will be the first time in almost 50 years that a Clinton, Bush, or Biden are not on the ticket? This is a cabal, and they just keep switching places. The Obama-Biden regime's socialist globalist redesign of America is happening. As I mentioned earlier, it's patient, it's long-term project. Requires them, however, at this point, to retain the White House. They have to concentrate their authoritarian power, and if they lose that to somebody like Donald Trump, it could fall apart. It is telling that Harris has already added 3 leaders to her campaign staff who managed Barack Obama's campaigns in 2008 and 2010. And last week, Axios reported on a scary prospect who Harris is expected to name in her cabinet if she wins. The report names Eric Holder as her potential chief of staff, Jake Sullivan as the potential Secretary of State, and Rahm Emanuel as the Beeve, possibly the National Security Advisor. The Axios reports say that Emanuel will be a key player in the transition if Harris wins. Almost everyone mentioned in this report either worked in the Obama administration or have close ties to the Obama-Biden-Clinton network. Do you see what's going on here? They must keep the regime together. This is a show that you are watching. This is a puppet show. Unfortunately, the consequences are real in your life. The fastest way to see the fundamental transformation of America go through completion is to vote for Harris-Walz. They are accomplishing their socialist globalist agenda. Look at the rest of the world. Why is it they're doing exactly the same thing as the person behind the desk at the Oval Office? Because the person who sits in the Oval Office doesn't really matter anymore, as long as he or she is malleable and remains a team player. Presidents come and go, but there are no term limits for regimes. President Obama may have gone, but did he really? This is our moment. This is the moment that we will either breathe a sigh of relief or we will face the future of America being Venezuela. Because make no doubt about it, as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, Kamala Harris is America's Hugo Chavez. No doubt. We'll have more on this and the latest news on tomorrow's radio broadcast. I'll see you there. Thanks so much for watching The Blaze from the Mountain West. Good night, America.